Hello, welcome to Z Marie Design. Let's create a reusable fabric gift bag just in time for the holidays. So let's get started. Now my gift bag is created from the inspiration of the Crafty Gemini, and I'll leave a link in the description to her channel. And she made a smaller version of this, and my gift required a larger gift bag, so I created mine a little larger, measures 24 by 24 inches, and I created it using my scrap fabrics of 6-inch squares, and I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to start with my 6.5-inch squares, and I'm just going to create a scrappy look. Now you can always do this color coordinated, but I'm just going to go scrappy. So I'm going to start with my 6.5-inch squares, placing them right sides together, sewing a 1/4-inch seam allowance, and I'll create a 2-patch. Once those are sewn 1/4-inch, I'm going to press those seams to one side. And I'll create 2 of those. And now I'm going to make sure that my fabric, one seam goes in one direction, one seam goes in another direction, and making sure that any prints that I have are in the right orientation and those seams are laying opposite of one another. And I will put those 2 patches, right sides facing, matching those seams, and sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance to create my 4-patch. Now once I've sewn my 4-patch, I'm going to take 2 of those because I want to make my gift bag a little larger. So I'm going to sew 2 4-patches together. And I'm going to put those right sides facing, matching those seams, and sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance. So once my 1/4-inch seam allowance is sewn, I'm going to press that seam to one side. And right now my rectangle measures 12 by 24 or 12.5 by 24. So now I created 2 of those rectangles, and I'm going to put those right sides facing. And I'm going to match all those seams. And I'm going to put a pin in them just to make sure that they don't shift on me. Now if they do shift a bit, I'm not going to be too distressed about that, but trying to get it as accurate as I can. Pinning everything in place, sewing a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Once that's done, my first panel is done. So my 1/4-inch seam allowance is sewn. I'm going to press those seams just like I did all the previous seams, and press the seams to one side. And now my panel measures 24.5 by 24.5. Now you can make your gift bag any size that you like. You can have this one whole cloth. I'm just wanting to use up some of my scraps of fabric, so that's why I'm doing them with my 6.5-inch squares. I'm going to create 4 panels, 2 for the main body of the bag and 2 for the lining. So the top 2 will be my main body of the bag and the bottom 2 will be the lining. So now I'm going to cut out at the bottom of on each of the sides of the main body of the bag. I'm going to cut out 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares to create my boxed corner. So I'm going to put these panels right sides facing. Now I have to match all of these seams on the raw edges. If you're just using a whole cloth of fabric, you just match your raw edges on the bottom and your raw edges on the sides. So I'm going to take the time to match my seams. And then I'll show you the next step. Now everything is all pinned in place. I'm going to sew down 1/4 inch seam allowance on the right, on one side, on the other side, and on the bottom, not on those box corners. But before I do that, let me show you here what we're going to do to create the casing. Now I'm going to use this rope and that I have, and now you want to make sure that your rope measure is double. Now I made a mistake here in cutting this in half, and I'll show you in the next step the right way to do that when you're going to measure. But you're going to measure the width of 2 pieces of whatever it is you're using, whether it's rope, whether it's twine, whether it's ribbon that you're going to use to create your drawstring, and you're going to create an opening that's about 1/2 inch, so 1/4 inch on large width, larger than double of what you're using. So you're going to measure down from the top 1.5 inch, and you're going to make a mark. And then I'm going to measure down again 2.5 inches, and I'm going to make a mark. And that part of the casing you won't sew. That part you will leave open, and you'll pin that on both sides. So you want it to be wide enough for it to go through double, and I'll show you that in another step. But right now I'm just going to put an X at each of those markings just to remind myself. I X it with my pin, so I'm going to start at the top, back stitching, go down to the first mark and back stitch. And then I'm going to leave that opening, start at the second mark, back stitch, and sew all the way down to the bottom and back stitch. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Again, just to make sure you understand, start at the top, back stitch, stop at the first marking and back stitch, start at the second marking, back stitch, and sew all the way down to the bottom. And then I'm going to sew up the bottom seam. And I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the next step is to press these seams open. Now I took a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means that these seams are quite tedious to press open. I wish I'd taken a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but we're going to make this work. So you can see there where my fingers were, where my openings are that I didn't sew. So now I'm going to box those corners, matching the side seam with the bottom seam. I put a pin in just to make sure that they are matched, and then pin the rest. And I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll do that on both sides. And this is when it comes in handy when you're pressing those seams open. It just makes it so much easier to create an accurate boxed corner when you're matching that side seam with the bottom seam. So a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and the outside of your bag is all done. And now I'm going to turn it right side out. That's the part there that's going to create the drawstring casing that I didn't sew. Now if you made a mistake and you did sew it, just unpick that so you'd have at least 1 inch opening. And this is the outside of my bag. So now we'll move on to the lining. So you'll create the lining the exact same way. I have 2 panels, and I'm going to cut out that corner to create the box corner, and I'm just going to use my post-it note. It measures 2.5 by 2.5, and I'm going to cut out on each of the bottom parts of the panel, each corner, and I'm going to put these right sides facing. And once again, since I'm piecing mine, I need to match up those seams. If you have a whole cloth, you're just going to pin yours in place on the right side and on the left side and down at the bottom. And then I'll show you the next step. So everything is all pinned in place on one side, on the bottom, and on the other side. But now we're going to create a spacing that we're not going to sew. So we'll have a space to turn this bag right side out. So I'm going to make a mark on one side and about maybe 4 inches, make another mark. And that part we will not sew. So I'm going to put a pin in it. And I always like to create an X with my pin just to remind me, because I get to the sewing machine and I start sewing and I just forget. So this is my reminder. Start at the top and you're going to back stitch at the top and the bottom. You're going to back stitch at the bottom and you're going to sew to the first pin, leave that opening, back stitch at the next pin, and then sew all the way to the top and back stitch at the top. And then you're going to also sew that bottom, and you're going to make sure that you're back stitching at the beginning and the end of each of those. Press those seams open and create that box corner, again matching up the side seam with the bottom seam, pinning everything in place, and sew 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'll do that on both sides. So now everything is all sewn. You can see where my opening is that I didn't sew. My corners are all boxed. And I'm going to leave my lining of my bag, I'm going to leave it wrong side out. The main body of the bag is right side out. So I'm going to place the main body of the bag inside the lining. This is just like making a purse, except we won't have handles. We'll have a drawstring, which I'll show you how to create in the next couple of steps. So I'm going to start by matching my center and matching my side seam. I pin all 4 of those in place, each of my side seams and each of my center, and then I just continue to pin all the way around. And then I go to the machine and I sew 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around after everything is all pinned in place. So now everything is all sewn. My lining and my main body of the bag are together. I'm going to pull the main body of the bag, pull everything right side out through that opening. That's why it's so important that you leave that opening, and leave yourself a good 4 inches depending on how wide your bag is. If you're making a smaller bag, you can leave a smaller opening. And pull everything right side out. Finger press those seam allowances in, and you're going to just take it to the sewing machine and stitch that opening close. You can stitch this by hand, but I just stitch it on the machine. So my opening now on my lining is all closed. I'm going to put my lining inside the main body of the bag. And I push everything all the way down. I'm finding where my little casing openings are, since I have all of these squares, to make sure that I have the side seam. So now I'm going to press everything under where my lining does not show. And pressing that seam really well. And then I'll take it to the sewing machine and I will do a top stitch. And I'm going to top stitch about 1/4 inch all the way around. Now it's time to create your casing, now that you have everything all top stitched. And I just do a really good pressing with a lot of steam to make sure that that lining sits nicely. So now to create your casing, I'm going to find my opening there on my side seam. And I'm going to put a pin at the top of the opening, and I'm making sure that my pin goes through the main body of the bag and the lining of the bag. So on both sides, it goes all the way through. I'm going to put another pin at the bottom of the opening. making sure again your pin connects your main body of your bag and your lining. And you'll do that on both sides. And then I'm going to take my marking tool so that I can mark the opening of my casing. It comes down about maybe 1.25 inches and then down again about another 2.25 inches from the top. So I'm going to put it where the side seam is facing up, and I'm going to create my markings. So with my ruler, I'm going to put the ruler from the top, 1.5 inches from the top, and 2.5 inches from the next opening. So for the first opening, the first marking, place your ruler 1.5 inches right at the top of your bag. And that's right, should be right at your first opening, and just make your adjustments there. Try to make it as accurate as you can, and then just make a mark. This is the easiest way. Now if you don't have one of these long rulers, you will do this with your tape measure or your seam gauge all the way around. And then on my next marking, I'm going to come down to 2.25, making sure that the ruler is where that opening of that casing is, and I'm going to make that mark on that side. And then I'm going to also put some pins in it because I don't want my lining to shift on me when I take this to the sewing machine to sew to create that casing. And then my pins are also going to serve as my guide, my sewing guide, because just in case my marking tool brushes off, I'm using chalk marking tool. Just in case it brushes off, my pins will serve as my guide. And I'm going to take it to the sewing machine once I mark the other side, and you'll sew all the way around on both of those markings, and that'll create your casing. You'll see in the next step. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. You can see where my pins and my markings are, and I've done the markings on both sides. That's going to be my casing opening, and the other side, that's my casing opening. So I've done these marks on both sides all the way around the bag. I'll take it to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew all the way around on both of the markings, starting right there, back stitching really good there because that's a stress point on both sides. And now that red ribbon, that red rope that I have, I'm going to start by feeding it in one side of the opening, and I'm going to thread it all the way through. I'll show you in the next step, but once you come out, I'm going to make sure that I tie it so that it doesn't go through as I'm pulling on this bag. So now as you take your ribbon or your rope or whatever you're going to use to create your drawstring, I'm going to put a safety pin on one end, and I'm going to start on one end of the bag through the casing opening, and I'm going to feed it all the way through. Now this is when I realized that I cut my rope too small, because once I got the drawstring through and I've tied it off, I don't have enough rope for the bag to open. So I'm going to show you how to make sure that you cut your drawstring, that you cut it the right way. So as I continue to go through to get it to come out of the same opening, the same side that you went in, I realized that, oh no, I cut it too small. So now I have to go and create another drawstring because my bag won't open. But you're going to come out the same opening that you went into. And I'll show you the right way to cut and the better way so that you can see how it's inserted. I'll show you that in just a minute. I wanted to leave this part in here in the video so that you can see how not to cut it too short, because this is what will happen if you do. So now that that red piece of drawstring is in there and it's all the way through on both sides and I tie it off, it's too short. And so I can't get the bag open to even put the gifts in. So it cinches beautifully, but it doesn't open. So now I'm going to switch to this twisted fabric rope that I've created, and you're going to make this, when you do this, you're going to do it double the size of the width of your bag plus an additional 6 inches. And I'm just tying it off so that it doesn't unravel. So you see that I measured it, it's double the size of the width of your bag plus 6 inches. So you're going to go through one side and you're going to come out as you feed it through. You're going to come out the other side. Now through that next one, you're going to go in the opposite side. And I put this on the end of a safety pin, and I'm just feeding the safety pin all the way through. Now you can attach this to a bodkin if you want. I do have a bodkin, but I just didn't have it here at the video area, so I just put it through a safety pin, which works just fine. Feed it all the way through, and then I'm going to come out the same side that I fed it through. So as I pass the first one, I'm going to keep going past that. I'm just going to keep going past it. And this is why you make your opening so that it's a width that's double what the width of whatever it is you're using, whether it's ribbon, whether it's twine, whether it's a braided rope, whatever it is that you have, because you're going to be making 4 pieces of this that will be feeding through. So it needs to be large enough to fit all of that. So I'm just feeding it through my casing. My casing is plenty wide to fit this rope. And if you want to see how I made this rope, just leave me a comment in the comment section and I can do a video on how I made this rope. And now I've come out the other side, the same size that I started feeding it in through. I've come out that side on one, and then I've done the same thing on the opposite side. I'm going to tie both of my ropes together, end to end, making sure to match up those ends, tying it off so that it doesn't go through the casing, and I have to start all over. So now my gift bag can open plenty wide. I'm going to make sure to even out my ropes so that the ties will be evenly spaced. And my gift bag is all done, all ready for gifts. It's reusable, it's fully lined, cinches beautifully. I can tie it in a bow. I have plenty of rope there. Untie it, insert my gifts. My son has a birthday that's coming up, so that's why I wanted to make this drawstring bag, gift bag for him. I also am going to show you how I package my quilts when I make those and prepare them for shipping. Now for this gift bag that I created, I just used some leftover quilt squares that I had, sewed them together the exact same way I just showed you. Cut the width that I needed and the length that I needed for the gift bag. Created my fabric rope with some bias binding and inserted it in. Put the gifts in And I have a reusable gift bag made from my fabric scraps. Again, you can use a whole piece of cloth if you like. I just like using up the fabric scraps that I have. And it just makes this so much more personable when you're giving a gift. And it cinches beautifully. So I hope you like this project, and I hope you'll give it a try. And this is how I did a video on how I hang my quilts using the alien tape. That's what I'm showing you there. And this is how I package my quilts. I created this quilt for a client, and this is how I package for shipping. I create this gift bag, and I folded the quilt, and I knew what size gift bag I needed to create. I folded in thirds, and then I'm going to put a plastic bag inside, and then put the quilt inside the plastic bag, inside the gift bag, just in case there's some spillage when you're in the box in the postal office. I don't know what's going on. I know that it's still nice and safe. I tied it up, and then I will cinch the gift bag. So not only does the recipient of the quilt get this beautiful quilt, they're also going to get a reusable gift bag. And I can tie it in a bow, put it in a box. It's ready for shipping. And now I also created another gift bag that that I made for my sister-in-law when I made her jacket. And I did a video on that. I was going to do some buttons on it, and I showed you how to create some alternatives to buttonholes. And I'll show you that in just a minute. I made a gift bag, a reusable gift bag for that as well. So anytime I'm making something for a client, this is how I'm going to ship it and present it to them. So again, I'm going to fold it, and I folded it up, measured it out how wide and how long I needed the gift bag to be. And once again, since it's going in the mail, I'm going to create a plastic lining. I just put a kitchen garbage bag in there and the plastic lining. Put the jacket inside the plastic lining. Cinch that up very well, tied it up, and then again cinch the gift bag.